Hi and welcome to my talk about the crypto revolution. I do not have a financial background, so I'm not providing financial advice. In 2020, I started to study which investment strategy would be the best for me. And since the US market is the strongest economy in the world, I checked how much profit I would have made if I invested into the S&P 500 at the peak of the dot-com bubble. I would have made 250%, but comparing it to inflation, it actually didn't increase so much. I couldn't explain myself how this can happen simply because I had no idea what money is or where it's coming from, so I checked the definition. Money should actually fulfill 7 different attributes. It should be portable, durable, divisible, should serve as a medium of exchange, it should be fungible, meaning a dollar note should have the same value as another dollar note. It should serve as a unit of account and as a store of value. Humans have used gold for thousands of years for trading, but trading with gold wasn't very easy because, for example, lumps of gold are not fungible. But this changed in 600 BC in Lydia, which is in Turkey, when humans introduced gold and silver coins. From this moment on, money in form of gold was somewhat portable, meaning it was just a bit hard to bring it from A to B if you had too much or the distance is very long. Gold and silver is highly durable, but in form of money, you are actually exposed to some government risks, which I will come back to later in this talk. It's divisible by melting, it's served as a medium of exchange. Nowadays, not anymore, because you would have to go to the bank first and exchange it to banknotes. It's fungible, historically serves as a unit of account and as a store of value. So using this form of money worked relatively well until, for example, 627 BC in the Roman Empire, when they started to stretch their gold and silver coins with non-precious metals. So this here is a Roman denarius, and it contained 95% silver in 27 BC and only 0.5% silver in 270 AD. So of course, inflating coins like this caused prices for goods and services to go up because people still wanted to have the same amount of gold and silver for their goods and services as in the past. So the Emperor Diocletian, he introduced a price cap policy in 284 AD to minimize problems that were coming with soaring prices. But it didn't solve any problems because people just started to trade on the black market instead, or they stopped producing goods and services. This was then followed by social unrest, and then the Germanic tribe used this weakness of the Roman Empire and invaded them. So the Roman Empire then actually collapsed under its own inflation because it couldn't fund the war. As pointed out by Mark Twain, this doesn't only happen once, it happens multiple times. And he said, "A favorite theory of mine is that no occurrence is sole and solitary, but is merely a repetition of a thing which has happened before and perhaps often." So, for example, in the Weimar Republic after the First World War, which is now Germany, there was a massive hyperinflation. You can see in the graph 1 trillion paper marks in 1924 had the same purchasing power as one paper mark in 1917. So people were actually so miserable and desperate to get out of their situation that they even followed Adolf Hitler's ideas to get out of this situation, and it resulted into another world war. At the same time, there was a crisis happening in the US, and this crisis is still affecting us today. So in 1933, President Roosevelt outlawed the possession of gold. Why did he do this? Well, back then, the US dollar was pegged to gold, meaning the US government wasn't allowed to bring more money in circulation than they had gold in their reserve. By making it illegal to hold gold, people had to bring their gold to the government. That increased their reserves, and they could bring more money in circulation. 1 year later, in 1934, they even artificially raised the gold price from $20 per ounce to $35 per ounce, which again increased the money supply in the US. Interestingly to know that in many countries it's still illegal nowadays to buy gold anonymously. Some economists, however, saw the importance of controlling money supply and they introduced the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. This was mainly driven by John Kane and Harry Dexter White. These were two economists from the UK and the US. And they said, well, the gold price now needs to be fixed to $35 per ounce, and the US dollar needs to be pegged to it. Furthermore, all countries which are part of the Bretton Woods Agreement, they will have to have fixed exchange rates against the US dollar, and if they want to change their exchange rates, they had to apply to the International Monetary Fund to get this approved. However, less than 40 years later, there was an event to which people refer to as the beginning of the currency war. In 1971, President Nixon already ended the Bretton Woods Agreement, and he announced the temporary suspension of the convertibility of the US dollar into gold. So this event was very significant. You can also see it on the $20 notes. On the left one is the $20 note from 1971, and before it says $20 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. On this statement is not there anymore on the right side. So when you went to the bank with the $20 notes from after 1971, you didn't get gold anymore for your banknote, but just another banknote. So how did President Nixon actually justify this move? Well, the US was importing more goods and services than exporting, and they paid those goods and services with US dollars. Foreign holders of those dollars, especially Europeans, they began to exchange dollars for gold, and that was depleting the nation's gold reserves. President Nixon said, these are speculative attacks on the US, and we need to save and protect the US citizens from those attacks. However, I think if the US government had backed up their dollars with gold, there wouldn't be any problem in paying the gold to the holders of the US dollars. So let's have a look how this affected the gold price in the US. In 1971, the gold price was at $35, and now it's actually at $2,400. I didn't update this graph in 1 month, so the gold price increased by another 20% over the last few weeks. How did this affect the monetary inflation in the US? Here you see the graph. From 1959, the money supply increased by 67 times. The increase in money supply also affected the consumer price index. So here you can see since 1971, it went up quite dramatically. You also need to consider that specific products and brands included in the CPI basket can change over time. So it's not a very stable way to measure the CPI. Inflation did also cause our assets to inflate, so let's have a look at them. Here you see a graph from 1971 to 2024, and the y-axis shows the percentage, the increase in percentage of the money supply in green, the house price in blue, the consumer price index in turquoise, and the house price index divided by the money supply in white. And you can see if you bought a house in 1991 in the US, on average, you would be in a loss of almost 34%. Here we printed the S&P on top of this. So if you invested into S&P in 1991, you actually would have saved yourself from inflation, which is not bad. So since there isn't any Bretton Woods Agreement anymore, I thought maybe other countries did do better than the US actually. So I checked out the inflation in the UK. But again, I never really paid attention to money, or also not any attention to our banknotes. But what I saw when I looked at it actually made me cry and laugh at the same time. So when you zoom into this little statement here, it says, I promise to pay the bearer on demand a sum of £10. So you can have a guess on how the monetary inflation looks like in the UK. Here, since 1987, it increased by 10 times. This is the increase in the house price index. It's roughly the same, 10 10 times since 1983. So since I have seen this graph first time, I'm not talking about the housing bubble anymore, but about the money bubble. Let's look at developing nations. The inflation is even more extreme there. So here we see Turkey. Since 2006, it increased by 56 times the money supply. This is the Turkish lira against the US dollar. It lost 99.99% of its value since 1990, so it's extremely difficult for people in Turkey to import any goods and services. The same in Argentina. In 2013, you paid 5 pesos for $1. Now you pay 800 pesos for $1. This is the most extreme example. Zimbabwe, they had a hyperinflation. This is a graph showing from 2009. The money supply increased since 2009 by 51,000 times. So President Mugabe introduced a price cap policy already before 2009, where there was already a hyperinflation. But it didn't really help, as you can see in the graph. So this month, in April 2024, they introduced a new currency called Zimbabwe Gold. Apparently, it's backed up by precious metals and other foreign currencies. This is actually nothing unusual. Governments are changing their currency quite regularly. So, for example, in Germany, we only over the last 100 years, we had 5 different currencies. We went from the paper mark to the Rentenmark, the Reichsmark, the Deutsche Mark, and finally we are using the euro. Also, Germany had the brilliant idea, like the Romans, to introduce price control policies. So since 2015, rental prices are actually limited in their increase. So let's evaluate the attributes of money now again, or fiat money against the attributes of money. Fiat money is somewhat portable as long as you make transactions which are not suspicious or unusual. So if you want to make a transaction into another country, which isn't seen very often, some the bank which you are using might actually classify it as being suspicious and block it or freeze your funds. Money in form of paper or plastic is somewhat durable. You would assume it's durable when you store it on the bank account, but it's actually not. So for example, in 2012, there was a crisis in Cyprus, and 50% almost of all bank deposits above 100K got seized overnight. And now you also know what I meant with durability of gold. It's not so durable to hold gold if the government makes it illegal for you to hold it, like it happened in 1933. Fiat money is divisible. It serves as a medium of exchange. It's fungible. It serves as a unit of account. But as we saw in the graphs, it doesn't really serve as a store of value. And these are the problems, mainly portability, durability, and store of value, which Bitcoin is trying to solve. So what is Bitcoin? I put the Earth flag here because it's the first global currency and also a global payment system simultaneously. Everyone can access it. It's completely permissionless. It's decentralized, so it's not like having a bank account with, for example, HSBC, where there are a few servers that store how much you actually have stored on your bank account, and a few people can take decisions over approving transactions for you or freezing your funds. There are millions of computers that all have equal power, and everyone in the world can have such a computer and take part in the network. It's a digital protocol which is fully open source, meaning everyone can check how Bitcoin actually works. It's a peer-to-peer network. As I said, it doesn't require authority. And it's trustless. So we don't need to trust a central power like some heads in HSBC or the Bank of America to approve transactions and being responsible with our funds, because it's a digital protocol which is worldwide the same and we can just verify it. So when did Bitcoin actually come alive? So in 2008, this white paper got published by a person or a group of people under the name Satoshi Nakamoto. No one knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. And it doesn't actually matter. It could be the CIA, it could be Vladimir Putin or the royal family in the UK, or someone's grandma who is listening to this talk. We don't know, because it doesn't matter. Because as I said before, we can actually verify the open source code and the protocol, and we don't need to trust anyone. That's similar to Euclid. We can validate geometry and we can use it. We don't care if Euclid was a good or a bad guy or what motives he had. So I said Bitcoin is solving the store of value problem. How is it doing it? Well, by being very scarce. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. Now we can verify this by going on github.com/Bitcoin. Here you see a piece of the source code. The file is called validation CPP, that's standing for C++. That's a coding language they are using. And here in line 1672, you can actually see something called halvings. That's the halving time, and it defines for how long we are going to continue to increase the supply of Bitcoin. When this if condition is met, we return 0, means no more Bitcoin will be added to the supply. So let's talk about portability. So I said before, portability is not really given in our fiat system, because in the fiat system we need to have a central power that approves transactions. Not so much in the Bitcoin network, but there's another issue with fiat money. So normally when we make a transaction, we can just do it with the details printing on the bank card. So everyone who has a glance at your bank card can go home and buy a nice holiday or whatever. And this is, in computer science terms, as if someone prints a private key into a semi-public document. This would never happen. So the Bitcoin network is trying to solve this in a nicer way. And it's actually doing it by using two keys. There are private keys and public keys. They are coupled, and the private key is used by the owner of the Bitcoin to sign a transaction they want to execute. And the public key is used to verify the transaction. So let's say those people want to send each other Bitcoin. They sign this transaction using the private key, and then they broadcast these transactions into the Bitcoin network. Once they are in the Bitcoin network, you don't see any information anymore that can tell you who sent the Bitcoin or who will receive them. The addresses from and to will just contain random letters and numbers. Furthermore, there's a transaction ID, the amount of Bitcoin that needs to be sent, a fee that will be paid by the sender for validating the transaction and executing it, and the digital signature, which was done with a private key. This signature will later be validated with a public key. So once those transactions are in the Bitcoin network, they will go into a pool of unconfirmed transactions, and then the miners come into play. Miners are just those computers, and they are specialized on solving a very limited amount of tasks. First, they pick the transactions they want to actually verify and approve. They usually pick the transactions with the highest fees first, because that's how they earn money. That's how they earn. Then they validate the transaction using the public key, and then they find something called the proof of work to validate a block of transactions. How do they validate a block of transactions? Well, it's just a competition. The computer which first solves a specific mathematical function, we call this process mining, will supply the block to the blockchain. So, and the computer who first found the proof of work will get a reward for this. This computer will currently get 3.125 Bitcoin plus the validation fees, and will attach this block to the chain. So how does this mining process exactly work? This will also answer the question how those blocks here are actually linked. Here you see the blockchain on the left in 3 dimensions, and I just show them here again in 2 dimensions linked to each other. And you can see that every block will have the entire information of the last block. So block 10,001 will have the information of block 10,000, and those information are hashed. That's just a mathematical function that runs over the information. Then you have transactions, which I explained before, and a nonce. The nonce is a proof of work. Why is the nonce a proof of work? Well, the nonce here has to be selected in a way that this function here, it's a hash function of the entire block, including this nonce, creates a result y with a predefined amount of zeros at the beginning here. As I mentioned before, this is nothing than just a simple mathematical function. So once this nonce is found, it will be attached to the block here in block 10,000. And the block can be linked to the blockchain. Next, and it's also very important, there will be Bitcoin nodes. Those nodes verify the nonce to make sure that this block is not corrupted. Then, this is actually the hash of the next block. So this will be in the header of block 10,003. So what happens if we have 2 miners that find the proof of work at the same time? Then we would have something called a soft fork. But we only want to have one chain, and that's why the Bitcoin network now needs to decide which one of those 2 forks should be attached to the chain. So it needs to find agreement, and it does it by just continuing to mine blocks on both forks. The fork which is longer first will be attached to the real chain, the blockchain, and the fork which is shorter will basically forget about all the work it has done, that was done for it, and it will empty out all the transactions back into the pool of unconfirmed transactions. So let's go back to the financial side of things. Here, this is a graph which I've shown you before from 1991 to 2024. Now I'm going to print the Bitcoin price on top of this, but from 2009, because that's when we started mining Bitcoin. And it looks like this. So S&P and everything stays down here simply because Bitcoin is outperforming everything dramatically. So since most people don't belong to Satoshi Nakamoto and just didn't start mining or buying Bitcoin in those early years, let's assume we bought Bitcoin at the peak of the bull market in 2017. How would our portfolio look like? We would be in a loss until almost 2021. The biggest loss would be minus 75%. We went up into a profit of 330%. The profit dropped to 20%, and now we would be in a profit of 360%. So Bitcoin is still extremely volatile, but if you keep your fiat money invested long enough in Bitcoin, then you can, if history repeats, expect a profit. For how long do you have to leave it invested at least? So this is the 200 weeks moving average, and it shows you that it will never really go down. It just continuously goes up. And that means if you keep your Bitcoin invested for 200 weeks, which means 4 years, you will not have a loss. So let's evaluate Bitcoin against the attributes of money. Is Bitcoin portable? I think it's highly portable. In order to make a transaction, you only need to have your private key, which I explained before. And if you lost your device or your device got destroyed that holds your private key to sign transactions, you can just regenerate it with something called a seed phrase. People also sometimes call it passwords. You wouldn't store those passwords on a piece of paper, but you store it somewhere safely, and many people use something like that. That's a steel capsule, which is water and fireproof. Furthermore, you can make a transaction worldwide at any point in time because the miners are working 24/7. Also, the crypto exchanges are open 24/7. So it's not like a stock market where where you have to wait over the weekend until it opens on Monday again. And you can send Bitcoin to anyone. It's completely permissionless, so anyone who has a mobile phone even can receive Bitcoin. Is it durable? Well, since it's a decentralized network containing of millions of computers, it's highly durable, and even if all those computers would go down because of some catastrophe, we still have the blockchain saved on satellites. Furthermore, it's divisible because one Bitcoin contains 100 million Satoshi. It doesn't serve yet as a medium of exchange, but there are countries that actually start accepting it. So, for example, El Salvador is using it as having Bitcoin as legal tender. In Argentina, you can settle contracts in Bitcoin. Of course, in both countries, you don't have to pay capital gain tax. In Switzerland, in some cantons, you can pay a tax in Bitcoin, and some merchants accept Bitcoin as payments. Is Bitcoin fungible? I think it's fungible. Some people say we can actually blacklist certain Bitcoin addresses. I think it's technically extremely hard to implement, but I'm not going into the details here now because that would be out of scope. Bitcoin doesn't serve yet as a unit of account because it's not adopted, but once it's adopted and we would have a more stable price, it potentially serves as a unit of account. Does it serve as store of value? Well, it has proven to be inflation resistant, even though it's still volatile. And here I want to mention actually a few things that happened this year. On the 15th of January, the SEC in the US approved Bitcoin spot ETFs. So since then, you can buy Bitcoin indirectly on the stock market via those tickers. Same in Hong Kong. Since the 15th of April, you can buy Bitcoin ETFs. And some companies use Bitcoin as treasury assets even. So for example, MicroStrategy holds 240,000 Bitcoin, SpaceX holds 8,200 Bitcoin, and Tesla holds Bitcoin as well. So if you invested into those companies on the stock market, you indirectly already invest into Bitcoin. Another very important topic is ESG because Bitcoin is heavily criticized for using too much energy. I think we should use this as an opportunity to solve existing problems we have in our world. So for example, here's a hydro box. And this is only standing there because Bitcoin miners incentivize the development of this electrical infrastructure in this area. So this is, for example, in Murang'a County in Kenya. In the Netherlands, some people started to use the heat of Bitcoin miners to heat their greenhouses. And I think it's just a matter of time until we have water heating system and domestic house heating systems based on the heat of Bitcoin miners. Another very important topic to raise is that 40% of the world population doesn't have access to a banking infrastructure. And this is simply because people are either too poor that the bank would be interested in offering them a bank account, they're physically too far away from banks, or they don't have an identity. In South Africa, for example, they use this app, Mashankura, which runs on any phone, and people can receive and send Bitcoin even without the internet. So if you want to have more information about this, you can research a woman called Anita Posch. She's from Austria originally, and she does a lot under the title Bitcoin for Fairness. Also, I want to talk about the philosophical point of technology or scientific finding adoption. I found this quote quite interesting from John Locke. He said, "Can we understand a subject without experiencing it?" And I think that's where currently with Bitcoin. So we haven't really experienced it because it's not adopted. So we don't know how the impact will be on our society. So people cannot fully understand it because it's not there yet. It's similar to trying to explain someone what is color when this person can't see color. You could explain everything to this person about photons, how they travel through the air, how they hit the eyeball, they travel to the back of the eye. There, the rods and cones will transfer it into electrical signal. The signals will be sent through the optic nerve into the brainstem, into the visual cortex, etc. Does this person, who knows now everything about color in theory, ever understand fully what color means? William Harvey said, no doctor over the age of 40 will ever believe me, when he actually found that humans have a heart. And Dr. Semmelweis from Austria, he was working in a hospital where they helped women giving birth. He observed that if doctors washed their hand before they go to these women, that would decrease the mortality rate from 18% to 2%. But people didn't want to believe him. They declared him as being insane, sent him to the mental hospital where he got beaten to death. Similar to our friend the internet, it was still highly questioned in the year 2000. So at this point, I would like to encourage everyone to play with the technology Bitcoin so they are prepared when it's coming. So, what is fiat if it's not money? Well, fiat does not serve as a store of value, as we figured out. But it does serve as a medium of exchange because it's highly liquid and essential for our short-term transactions. It's also a means for government taxations. Here's a graph that shows the net worth held by the bottom 50% from 1990 to 2024 in blue. In red, you see the net worth held by the top 0.1%. And in green, you see again the money supply in the US. So when I was a student, I had 1,000 pounds for a living. I paid 700 for my room, 100 for my gym. So I had 200 pounds for a living, meaning I couldn't even afford the bus. And that actually affected me on a quite long term. And this was because once I earned money, I was so relieved to actually have some cash on my bank account that I wanted to not lose it anymore. So I started storing it. But the problem with that is that if you use fiat as a store of value, you will just decrease your wealth and you will stay poor. So people which are part of this blue group should not get attached to fiat and push it away to buy assets. The further you go up here to the rich people, the fiat system is actually a great tool for you. So for example, you can use fiat in forms of cheap loans to buy more assets and increase your wealth. And some people don't ever even pay back those loans because they just continue to refinance them until they are dead. So what is gold and what is Bitcoin? Gold, in summary, does not serve as a medium of exchange anymore. Bitcoin does not serve as a medium of exchange yet. Gold serves as a store of value because it's somewhat limited in supply. Bitcoin serves as a store of value because it's definitely limited in supply. Gold is slow and difficult to transport, especially larger amounts. Bitcoin is fast and easy to transport. Gold is hard to validate. You have to make sound tests, you need to have a Fisher device, make chemical tests, or even cut it into pieces to make sure it's pure gold. Bitcoin is easy to validate because it's inbuilt in the protocol via the proof of work. So I would say Bitcoin is faster to transport than gold, easier to validate than gold, more inclusive than gold, can't be manipulated, stretched like gold, can't be mined through brutal means like gold. So for example, in the 16th century, there was actually a gold inflation in Spain. And before they got there, the Spanish conquerors forced the native people in the Americas to work in mines for them. So I would say Bitcoin is the digital gold, and gold is the analog version of Bitcoin. So I want to end this with a quote of Michael Saylor, who once said, "If you don't remember anything else I say today, just remember, Bitcoin is hope." Go on hope.com, which is a website by Michael Saylor, where you can find all the information you need. Thank you for listening.